Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to the Shooter Shoot Basketball Podcast, Episode 8 of Season 2, brought to you by the Blue Collar Media Group. I'm your host of the show, Kenneth Cotterill. Thank you all for joining me here tonight. Before we get into today's episode, this show is also brought to you by the Saskatchewan Podcast Network. The Saskatchewan Podcast Network is the only place to find local, original Saskatchewan podcasts and find them all in one place. The network has over 30 podcasts about topics including the CFL, the Rough Riders, Saskatchewan's craft beer scene, and much, much more. Visit SaskatchewanPodcastNetwork.com to learn more about the Saskatchewan Podcast Network and follow them on Facebook and Instagram as well. As I said, I'm your host of the show, Kenneth Cotterill. Today is a special Valentine's Day episode of the Shooter Shoot Basketball Podcast. So before I get into things, I would like to share a little bit of big news in my own life. First of all, my fiancée Victoria is officially cancer-free, which is huge news on her front. And we're also in the process of buying a home. So I want to thank her for even allowing me to do this show tonight. We've been incredibly busy with moving and everything. And I just want to say I love you, Vic, and thank you for allowing me to do this tonight. But we've got a full panel of NBA fans here today. So let's start out with our introductions. First up, we have our resident Celtics fan and basketball analyst that you can follow on Twitter at Asian Tatum. That's Chris Remick. Chris, how you doing today? I'm loving the college setup.
Thanks, man. Like we said, struggling off of those back-to-back losses to single-digit win teams. But, I'm doing all right. Happy to be back on this podcast. I think this is my second time being here. So thanks so much for having me.
Definitely, man. Really appreciate you coming on the show. Second, we have a writer for BCMG. He's a part of the Above the Rim podcast. He's a friend of the show, been on before. You can find him on Twitter at Nick Andre ATR. That's Nick Andre. Nick, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, man. I'm happy to be back on the show. Just ready to talk hoops, man. I honestly had a good time last time I was here, and I know we're gonna have a really good debate coming into this show.
Definitely. We've got a ton on the slate for you here tonight. We're going to be talking about some teams that are surging in the NBA, some that have faltered over the last couple weeks, and we're going to cap it off by talking about the NBA All-Star Game as a whole. But the first segment is getting the ball rolling. That segment is sponsored by Direct West. Direct West is a proud sponsor of the Saskatchewan Podcast Network. Are you a business owner looking for new avenues to promote your business? Direct West digital billboards are a great opportunity to highlight a new product, new promotion, or anything else you'd like your customers to know about. You can get local expert marketing help for all your business at directwest.com. So we're going to get right into things. We're going to talk about a couple teams, both of them out in the Western Conference, who have really shined over the last little while here. And the first of those is the Utah Jazz. They've won 18 of their last 19 games. They sit at 22-5 in the Western Conference. Nick, I'm going to start with you. What do you think the difference maker for Utah has been so far this year?
I think it's just obviously everyone's staying healthy. That's one thing. And then also everybody's kind of transitioned now to the team. Like when you look at last year's Utah team, it was Mike Conley's first year with the roster, so he was still trying to get a groove into anything. Jordan Clarkson, who I want to say came in midway through the season last year, I came in as well. So I think now with being over a year in, having that experience in the league, and then once the season was suspended, having that experience together in the bubble and playing well together before blowing that 3-1 lead, I just think that now they've all flourished together as one another. And also one of the biggest things for me is probably Donovan Mitchell being more of a leader. I know a lot of people were criticizing him last year just because he wasn't – I wouldn't say he didn't take that leadership role, but he wasn't really trying to find a way to get others involved. So now you see his passing is so much better than what it was before in the past. He's much absorb contact, going into the paint, and also dishing out to Bogdanovich, to Jordan Clarkson, to Mike Conley, to whoever, Joe Ingles, or whoever. So I think it's just a mixture of that, and I think that his leadership has really sparked the rest of the team going forward. Like Jordan Clarkson is a 6-man of the year candidate, which I believe he probably will win it, depending on how long he was level play. I want to say he was averaging 17 a game, 18 a game, or something like that. So that's another big thing as well. So for me, Utah's playing well. Now the question is how will this transition the rest of the season? Like, you team the third place, I believe so, but it will be difficult to get past teams like the Lakers, like the Clippers, like even per se Portland or any other teams out there in the West that have been contenders. So Utah is playing well, but they definitely have to keep this up in order to really show the rest of the league that they are a true threat.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure when it comes to Utah. I think injuries was huge for them last year. A lot of people didn't give Bogdanovich his injury enough credit because when Utah, like they gave Denver a run last year in the playoffs without him. And so to be missing, I believe he was their second or third leading scorer last year. When you're missing a piece like that heading into a playoff run, that can be incredibly difficult. Chris, I know a lot was talked about regarding the relationship between Gobert and Mitchell in the offseason. What have you noticed with them this year? Do you think the chemistry has looked solid between the two of them?
Yeah, I think that was blown way out of proportion by the media. Everybody likes to take a story and run with it. And yeah, obviously with something as serious as a global pandemic, obviously Donovan Mitchell is going to be like somewhat upset about the conduct of Rudy Gobert, but that doesn't mean that their relationship was trashed in any way. They're both grown men, then they're professionals. And you see it this season, and both of them have been leaders. And you don't really see Gobert being that vocal, but I feel like he's done a lot more this season to be more vocal. And you can see him talking to Mitchell a lot and helping him out and kind of taking responsibility as well. I think an important thing also is just they got guys like Derek Favors back, who's another very solid rebounder off the bench. Clarkson is playing phenomenally, and Conley and Bojan are back and playing better than they were last season. And I think the surrounding pieces are what's really making this Utah run what it is right now.
Yeah, when I looked at Utah's numbers this year compared to last year, they're scoring 3 more points per game. And they're also defending a lot better. They're giving up 3 less points per game. So when you've got a 6-point shift in a team like this, I think it's really showing. You guys talked about Jordan Clarkson at 17, 4, and 2. I mean, he's a 6th man of the year candidate for sure. You've got Mike Conley. He's shooting a lot better, I think is huge. 45% for him is kind of back to par. I think he was a lot lower last year. He really struggled, especially coming into the organization. I think all around it's a really balanced roster. I like that they can go with a strong 8-man rotation for playoffs, which some of these other teams that I think we're going to talk about, I don't think they necessarily can. So I'll ask you guys this. Do you think that this team can make a Western Conference Finals run? Chris, I'll start with you.
I think they can. It really depends on when the game slows down for them and they get into more of the half-court sets. This is one of the better ball movement teams in the league right now, and which is why they're shooting such high percentages from 3 and why they're hitting so many. And the question is, when the game slows down like that and the stakes are high, are they still going to move the ball like they are right now in the regular season? Or is the ball going to stick more to guys like Donovan Mitchell? We saw his performance in the bubble against Denver in that series, how he kind of took over. But at the end, he just didn't have enough left in the tank to kind of put him over the hump. So we'll see how this team performs once they're up against the Lakers in 70-game series or a team like the Clippers. But I have faith that they can make a deep run this year.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think people would point to a team like Denver, but the fact that they took them to 7 last year without Bogdanovich, I think that shows that they could beat them in a 7-game series. Nick, you talked about both LA teams. Could you see them knocking off either one?
As of right now, yes, I could see either both teams, but it's the NBA. Anything can happen. I mean, we saw how Utah played Denver last year in the playoffs, having that 3-1 lead. They really gave it to them, and they really made things difficult for them. So, do I think that they can make that type of run again? Of course I do. Especially coming into this year, they came with that same mindset to really attack everyone and really go after everyone. So yeah, I do definitely think that they have a shot. Now, I kind of agree with what Chris said. When the game slows down, what are they going to do? Are they going to keep that same level of play going, or is it just going to be like Donovan Mitchell ISOs like the entire time? So I think the challenge for Utah is to have that second consistent scorer like on a nightly basis. Like, who is it going to be for them like to really step up? Is it going to be Jordan Clarkson continuing his reign for 6th man of the year? Is it going to be a Mike Conley who has shown to like really step up in the play, especially during his days in Memphis? Will it be a Joe Ingles? Will it be a Bogdanovich, who everyone claimed that if he would have played in the bubble, they possibly would have gotten through Utah or Denver. So I think that's like the biggest challenge to me for Utah is who's going to like take that pressure off of Mitchell and kind of like somehow like help lead the way as far as like getting through these tougher teams like the LAs and all the other teams in the Western Conference.
Yeah, I agree 100% with you, what you guys are saying on this topic. I mean, I just think I look at both LA teams and I see a Kawhi and I see a Paul George. I see Anthony Davis and LeBron. And Donovan Mitchell in the playoffs is a completely different player. He was phenomenal last year, but who's going to be that second guy that can help them, catapult over the top of those LA teams? But the other team in the West that's been really interesting as of late has been the Phoenix Suns. They're sitting at 16-9 now. They're fourth in the West. They've won 5 games in a row, but what's impressed me the most is they've beat the Bucks, the 76ers, and the Celtics over that stretch. So, Chris, I'll go to you first. What's impressed you the most about this Suns team so far?
What's impressed me is guys like Mikal Bridges stepping up and being key parts of this team. Because we all knew going into the season, Devin Booker finally has a point guard that he can play with in Chris Paul, and he's not going to have to put up 30 plus a night to keep his team in this game. And it really shows. And Chris Paul is doing a fantastic job also helping Devin Booker kind of be that leader and teaching him how we can win games and how the best way to play is. I've also been impressed, although he hasn't been scoring a whole lot, DeAndre Ayton has been very solid and shooting very efficiently. So those 3 guys that they really had high expectations for have delivered. And also guys like Cam Johnson, field goal percentage wise, he's a little up and down, but he's shown that he can stretch the floor. And he was one of the key reasons that they beat the Celtics on those runs, because he was hitting open shots. So if role players like that can continue to make the shots that they're given, I think they're in a good position.
Yeah, I think one of the issues that I've taken when it comes to people talking about the Suns this year is they look at Devin Booker's numbers and they're like, well, he hasn't been that great. And it's like, well, no, he's still the same player. He's just having to do a lot less. I mean, we talk about they brought in a guy like Jay Crowder, who's going to help the rotation. They brought in Chris Paul. Cam Johnson is just getting better. DeAndre Ayton's just getting better. I think we're just seeing that Devin Booker's having to do a little bit less with the players that he has now, because before it was him and just a bunch of other guys. And so I'm glad to see that he's starting to be a part of a winning franchise, and to see them at 16-9 is really good. Nick, do you think this is just the addition of Chris Paul, or do you think some of those other guys that I mentioned is a big reason why they're sitting where they are right now?
I think it really starts with Chris Paul, but I mean, you can also like give credit to those guys like Mikal Bridges, like a Cam Johnson, like a DeAndre Ayton, who have really stepped up their game as well. But like I said, I mean, the CP3 effect, just him being such a phenomenal floor general and having a phenomenal IQ, like he makes the game easier for so many people. Like we saw what happened at OKC. OKC was not even supposed to be a playoff team last year, but you look at how guys like say Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Lou Dort, who else could you say on that team? Like a whole lot of guys on the Oklahoma City roster really stepped up the game phenomenal way. And the same is carried over for the most part of this season. DeAndre Ayton, like he said, is playing at a very exceptional level. He's not averaging like around 19-20 a game like I did expect, but he still is playing at a phenomenal level. But Mikal Bridges to me is probably one of the biggest factors, just like his energy that he brings off the bench, being able to knock down big time shots. Like it really helps Phoenix as a whole. So, just taking that pressure off of Devin Booker really helps in a long way. So we'll definitely, I personally think that Phoenix will continue to play this way going forward. And I think they'll continue to be like a legit threat in the Western Conference.
Yeah, I agree on that for sure. I really like what I've seen from Bridges, from Ayton, from Johnson. The only question that I have with this team is once you kind of get past that 6th man, where's the other production coming from? I look at some of the players on their roster. You've got guys like Etuan Moore, you've got Frank Kaminsky, but it just feels like there isn't enough depth there when it comes to Phoenix. They've been pretty fortunate to not have some of the significant injury troubles that some of the other teams in the West have had this year. So I'm going to be interested to see the wear and tear of an NBA season, even if it is a little bit shortened this year. It's still like a 70-game season. So I'm going to be curious to see what happens with Phoenix if they lose one of those guys for a significant period of time, because they may need to make a move at the deadline just to really shore up the roster and make a run in the playoffs. Because I don't know if you can give a guy like Moore or Kaminsky serious minutes in the playoffs and really see them flourish. So to end off this segment, I'll ask you guys, where do you guys see Phoenix finishing in the Western Conference standings come playoff time? Nick, I'll go to you first.
That's a tough one, considering that like the Western Conference really bounces so much like throughout the weeks. I'll say if everything goes right, if they continue to stay healthy, if Devin Booker and Chris Paul are playing at a high level, I'll say possibly the 4th, 5th, or 6th. I'll go with that.
Yeah, that's kind of the range that I see this team. I love the Booker and Paul duo that they have, but I'll be interested to see where they end up injuries wise, especially given that Chris Paul has missed some significant time over his career and he is getting up there age wise. Chris, what about you?
Yeah, I'd agree with that assessment. I'd say that they're a 5th or 6th seed to me if all goes well. My only concern is they have a decent amount of guys who have been scoring a decent amount, like Cam Johnson, Dario Saric, Jay Crowder. But when the playoffs come, and I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but like it really does happen. The game slows down. It's very difficult to find shots if you do not work within the flow of your offense. And these guys don't have any playoff experience whatsoever aside from Chris Paul and Jay Crowder. But when these young guys are the main contributors, it's going to be interesting to see what happens when they're in that first series. And you're in the West, so every first round matchup is going to be a tough matchup. So that's going to be the big question mark for them is their young guys going to be able to step up when they need to?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at some of the teams that you could potentially get as a 4, 5, or 6 seed, you could be looking at a Clippers in the first round. You could get a Nuggets in the first round. You could even get a Utah or a Lakers. Like it's pretty crazy in the Western Conference, the series that you can see in that first round. I'm not sure if I would take them to win a series given all the inexperience in the playoffs, but we've also seen plenty of players thrive once they get onto that bigger stage. So it'll be interesting to see how things play out the rest of the year in the West. But we're going to be switching over now, talking about some of the teams that are faltering. But this segment is sponsored by the Connexus Credit Union. Their podcast, What Connects Us, is a podcast featuring people in Saskatchewan that explores human connection, meaningful conversation, and the role that money plays in our hopes, dreams, and fears. Be sure to check it out today as they just interviewed the president and CEO of the Saskatchewan Roughriders, Craig Reynolds. I gave it a listen earlier today, and I really enjoyed it. So that's definitely one that you want to check out. But we're going to be looking at Shooter's Trade Block right now, which is we're looking at two teams that have kind of started to fall a bit. Starting with the Chicago Bulls. I mean, right now, when you look at the Bulls, they're sitting at 10-15. They've lost 4 of their last 6. They really seem like they're starting to fall off a bit. And I mean, Zach Levine has been absolutely balling out once again this season, but the Bulls are one of the worst defensive teams in the league. They're giving up 116 points per game, and they've had some injuries as well. So, Nick, I'm going to start with you. What do you think is wrong with the Bulls as a whole right now? Is it the players? Is it the coaches? Or is it kind of a combination of both?
I want to say it's possibly a combination. Well, like I said, I mean, Billy, it's Billy Donovan's first year, so he's still trying to figure out how to really get these young guys really compete and really, find a way to win games as a collective. But also, I mean, like we said, I mean, Zach Levine's just playing phenomenal. I believe he should be an all-star this year, regardless of the Bulls' record. But I think also defensively, they're just not necessarily that great, particularly perimeter defense wise. I mean, I've seen Zach Levine give up baskets. I've seen Kobe White give up baskets, and it's like I just feel like from that perspective, it's like that's the only way how you're going to win. I mean, we know what they can do offensively with Levine, with Kobe White, with Lowry Markkinen. It's really just all about how they're going to get stops. And I want to say they lost to the Clippers. I want to say that was the last game on a Friday night, Saturday night. I can't remember. But it's just really all about how do you win teams? How do you allow, or like how do you pretty much limit them to scoring easy baskets? So I think that's the biggest question for going forward. So the question is, do they make a move possibly during the trade down the offseason for a defensive top player? That's going to be the question. But I'm also not worried as well, just because they are a pretty young team, and I think they got enough years to come back and really kind of kind of make things happen.
Yeah, I mean, I do like some of the pieces that this team has. I mean, you talked about Kobe White. He's a 15-5-5 guy in his second year in the league. So he's shown a lot of potential. Wendell Carter, when he's healthy, he's a 12-8 guy. Patrick Williams, he's also averaging 10 points as a rookie. So I do see quite a bit of potential in some of the players that they have. But Chris, what would you like to see from the Bulls moving forward? Do you think they should be looking to move on from Zach Levine, or do you think they potentially need to just add a piece or two to really start to build a playoff team?
Well, I would say the main problem in Chicago is the disconnect between players and coaches, because everyone was excited when Billy Donovan signed with Chicago because of his run in Oklahoma City. He was majorly credited with that along with Chris Paul. So it's like, oh, wow, they have some young talent. Maybe he can turn them into a playoff team in the weaker East. But the disconnect between the Bulls roster and the Thunder roster was a bunch of gritty defensive-minded guys that were athletes. This Chicago team, they have 7 or 8 guys who are averaging 10-plus points a game, so they can score. The problem is there isn't really a true defender. I'd say the most promising defender on this team is either Thaddeus Young or Patrick Williams. And, like, that's really not saying much. And so, and you look like guys at like Markkanen and Wendell Carter, and you see a lot of potential when they play, but the question is, how many games are they going to play? And is it going to be enough games to get your team into the playoffs and to have a good playoff run? So what I would really like to see them do is go and find a really solid defender and a really good athlete. I tend to look at guys like Jeremy Grant, who has really exceeded expectations in Detroit, but his timeline with Detroit is completely off. Detroit has no intention of winning basketball games, and they're just kind of muddling in the middle of the pack. So Jeremy Grant's going to be a high-valued target if available come trade deadline time. That's someone that you look at. Guys like, I wouldn't say he's much better defensively, but Andre Drummond is a guy who gets you a lot of boards, and he averages a little bit over a block a game. That's a lot better than what you have right now. So if he's available, that's another guy you go get. But if you're Chicago, I'm hanging on to Zach Levine. He's been awesome this year. I think that you can make a playoff team with him, and I just don't think that it's worth trading when your timeline has a bunch of young guys who are developing as is.
Yeah, I think when it comes to Levine, like I mentioned, White, Carter, and Williams, they're all guys that are, a year or less or a couple years or less in the league. So I think you got to give it a little bit more time. I know a lot of people have been putting on Twitter like free Zach Levine. And, it is tough to watch when a player of his caliber goes out and scores like 40 plus and they're losing games consistently. But I think if you're the Chicago Bulls, you have to hold on to this guy, because if you don't, then your rebuild is going to be so much longer. And you can't hope that one of those 3 guys that I mentioned are going to be that guy. And Lauri Markkanen's been hurt and in and out of the lineup his entire career already. So that's a player that I worry about. But then we talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers, and you were talking about Andre Drummond. So this is pretty convenient heading into this segment. But, they started off pretty well this year. They were 9-9. People thought that they were looking really promising, but then they've lost 8 of their last 9. Chris, what do you think about Cleveland's direction right now? I know that they made the trade to bring in a guy like Jared Allen, who I'm a huge fan of as a fan. They've got Darius Garland playing well. They've got a young player in Okoro, and then you've got Colin Sexton and Andre Drummond as kind of your 1-2 right now. But it doesn't really seem like they're going anywhere with this roster. So what are your thoughts on Cleveland as a whole right now?
Well, Cleveland needs to decide what they want to do, like what direction they want to go in, because they're kind of just they're on cruise control in the middle of the middle, because they don't know if they want to go full like buy for every future asset we can, or just try and run with what we have, see if we can make a run for one of the lower seeds. I think you have guys like Sexton, Garland, Okoro, and Allen who are young and have already shown you promising flashes. So I think Andre Drummond, it really should be clear that he should be traded, especially for the sake of developing Jared Allen, who was a starter in Brooklyn. And one of the biggest pieces I think Brooklyn messed up trading away. And I think that they wouldn't have had to trade him away if Spencer Dinwiddie didn't get hurt. But that's another story for another day, I guess. But when there's a guy like Jared Allen who has the two-way potential that he's already shown, I think that's a guy that you buy into. And Andre Drummond, as good as a rebounder he is, he's not going to lead you to the playoffs. He's not going to lead you past a round against a tough team. So I think him and guys like Kevin Love should really be sold as quickly as possible before their value depreciates any further.
Yeah, Nick, I'm going to go straight to you with that one. So do you think that if you're Cleveland, you should be moving on from Love and Drummond?
Yes, I definitely think. I just think that with them at the age that they're at, I just think don't hinder their future for what they have to offer to a roster. Cleveland. I mean, just like Chris said, Cleveland's kind of in that position where they don't understand like where they can go right now, whether they can become possibly like a late or like a playoff team, or are they just like really just like gearing up for like the next 3, 4, 5 years? So I think with Kevin Love, who's in his 30s, I want to say Drummond's like probably late 20s, early 30s. I just think that they can ship them to a contending team. Like for example, like Drummond could be used on a team like possibly Brooklyn, maybe, but I mean I doubt that'll ever happen. But Drummond can be used anywhere. I mean, any contending team, just with his defense and his rebounding, and also with Kevin Love with his ability to space the floor and to be able to rebound as well. So I definitely think that if you are Cleveland, I just think that with those two guys who have so much to offer to a contending team, I just think that you should be able to ship them and then also see what you can also get back as far as building for the future.
Yeah, I think if you're Cleveland, they don't have an identity. You're kind of just stuck in that. Even if you were to make the playoffs, you'd be the 8th seed, and then you'd be like Orlando or Detroit a couple years ago, where you just get bounced. And then what does that really get you? It gets you a pick just on the fringe of the lottery or just outside of it. And I don't think that does a franchise any good. So before we move on, I'm going to say, who do you think will get traded first, Andre Drummond or Zach Levine? I'll go to you, Nick.
Probably Drummond. I'll say Drummond. I think Levine, even though the Bulls are winning, I think Levine somewhat wants to be there just to be able to like build with that future. Now, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he has came out and said that that he's not too happy with everything. But I think Levine, from my perspective, that I think he wants to actually stay and like try to build in Chicago, and then possibly within like the next year or so, if things don't work out, then maybe I do see him possibly requesting a trade. But I think Drummond really needs to be valued in a better position on a better contending team. So that's where I'm going to go with it.
Yeah, I think Cleveland's probably in a position where they're more willing to move on from him. As far as I know, Drummond expires his contract at the end of this year. So they're going to want to get him out of there and get some value from him, because if not, if Cleveland's direction is signing him to an extension, I mean, I don't really know what the direction of your team is. We did see them throw a ton of money Kevin Love's way, so I guess it wouldn't be that surprising. Chris, which guy for you?
I'm definitely going to go with Drummond here as well, because when you have a guy that is an all-star plus guy, and what I mean by that is a guy who's probably going to make the all-star team every year, every other year. And that's what it's looking like with Zach Levine, if he can keep this up. And plus, as in he's one of the better all-stars. There are fringe all-stars, and then there are guys who seem like locks. If he keeps this up for the rest of his career, he's going to seem like a lock every year. So when you have an all-star plus guy like that, you do not trade him unless he comes to your front office or on social media and says, I want gone. You cannot fix this. I want to be elsewhere. And as far as we know, Zach Levine has not done that. So you do everything to make him happy and get him the help that he needs on the team. So it doesn't end up being like that. Drummond is more of the fringe all-star. He once was an all-star, I believe. And he's getting up there in age, and he's on an expiring deal. So it's a lot easier to move him, and you're more incentivized to move him, especially with a younger roster. Levine's 25, I think. So there's really no benefit to trading him unless he says he wants out.
Yeah, Levine, I think you would have to demand a trade, because Chicago's not just going to trade him for no reason. Like, as you said, he should be an all-star. The only thing that worries me is the team record, because we saw Bradley Beal get snubbed last year based off of team record. hopefully he gets in based off of the vote. Otherwise, we could maybe see history repeat itself there. But I hope both of those guys do get in as All-Stars this year. It'll be interesting to see how the votes play out, and we're going to be talking about that in just a minute. So we're getting into Down to the Wire, which is our segment sponsored by Thrive Fantasy, the newest fantasy game that takes the hours of work out of the equation to find that diamond in the rough. It's just best on best. They got prop bets, contests, everything you need to not just survive the gambling experience, but to thrive in it. Deposit up to $50 and get it matched by entering code BCMG at signup. So the NBA is going ahead with its NBA All-Star game as millions of votes continue to pour in for that All-Star game. So I'll give you guys each a minute here just to talk about. Nick, I'll start with you. Do you think the NBA should even be going ahead with this All-Star game, or do you think they should just be naming who the All-Stars are and then kind of moving on with the rest of the season given the COVID situation?
I'm not mad at there being an All-Star game. The only thing that I am mad about is the location, which is Atlanta, Georgia, which if you live in the South, then the COVID cases continue to rise. And you can honestly tell why, because everybody's just kind of like not social distancing. Everybody's just kind of going out the way, like, everything's just normal. And it's just crazy down here in the South, at least from my perspective. So with the NBA, trying to really keep players safe and keep, everything going well, I just kind of question like why they would place it in Atlanta of all cities. Now, the thing is, now will they limit players from like going out and doing whatever? Now, I think that'll possibly be impossible, but it probably can happen. But the thing is that, if they do allow these players to like kind of do whatever they want while during the All-Star weekend, and then you have like, who knows, like 8 to 10 positive COVID cases, like now is like, where do you go from there? So I'm not mad at there being an All-Star game. I think it's well deserved, especially with what these players have had to go through over the last year or so. But the location to me is just kind of like
so why is it there?
Yeah.
Chris, what about you?
Well, from a fan standpoint, obviously you want to see the All-Star game, and I'd be happy to watch Jaylen Brown perform in his first All-Star game instead of sitting on the sidelines for his first selection. And from a league perspective, financially, it helps you a little bit. It gives you a little bit of bump for TV ratings and stuff like that. But I personally did not want to see an All-Star game this year from the players' perspective, just because during this period of time, they already said players can go see their families. There's going to be a little more lack in terms of protocol and stuff like that. And I just think that this spells that there's going to be some positive cases. And will we have to postpone more games? Will we have to postpone the season? Will that lead to more revenue loss? And the players have already come out and said, this is stupid. Why are we playing this game? We do not want to play this game. And there are some All-Stars that, an extra game, anything can happen in that game. You get injured in an All-Star game that you really shouldn't have. Everyone's going to be upset, and you're going to lose even more revenue. And so it's a huge risk to do that. I understand why they want to do that, but I just don't think it's the smartest idea.
Yeah, I think my concerns with it is because the players have so many concerns regarding it. I mean, the last thing we would need, Nick was talking about the conditions in the South there. You get one All-Star that goes out, gets COVID, and then suddenly he's around all the other All-Star players. What happens if you have an outbreak amongst the team? Then suddenly you've got dozens of players, and the best players at that aren't going to be able to play for a number of weeks, and we could see some complications from that. So I don't think they should be doing it from the player's standpoint. As you said, like as a fan, I would love to watch a 165 to 163 game, but I just don't know if it's necessarily the right move for the NBA. I understand the money side of it, but if it does end up, they're taking a risk, because if they mess this up, then you could see some serious revenue losses, as you said, Chris. But we're going to be putting a graphic up on the screen that's going to be showcasing how the NBA voting has been going so far. So when it comes to the Western Conference, it's a little bit small there, but you've got LeBron, Jokic, and Kawhi as the three leading vote getters for the front court out West. Out East, you've got Kevin Durant, Giannis, and Joel Embiid for the East. And then you've got Steph and Luka for the West guards, and Beal and Irving leading the East guards. So, Chris, I'm going to start with you. Do you agree with who they have as the current starters based off the fan voting, or is there a particular player that you take issue with?
In terms of starters, I'm not really upset because more or less it's the best players that are getting these votes. And people will allude to, Kyrie Irving wasn't playing, what he's a top 5. I'd say he's a top 3 point guard. Some will argue, but I think he's the 3rd best point guard in the league. And he's an entertaining player, so obviously fans want to see that. In terms of the West, like I said, it's pretty straightforward. I take issue with more the fact that guys like Andrew Wiggins are getting more votes than Christian Wood and Brandon Ingram. Alex Caruso's on the top 10. Klay Thompson has more votes than a lot of people, and he hasn't even played a single game this year. And I understand, anybody aside from the top 2 in the guards, top 3 in the front court doesn't necessarily matter. But at the same time, people should give credit where credit's due. Domantas Sabonis is another guy who I think should have significantly more votes. And just guys like that deserve recognition. I think it's kind of a waste to spend votes on guys like Alex Caruso.
Yeah, no, I agree. Even as a Lakers fan, every time I see Alex Caruso on there, I kind of just chuckle because, producer Davis today, he's even saying respect for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So the fact that he's not getting any love and we've got a guy who's playing probably anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes a game for the Lakers it's pretty sad to see. Klay Thompson hasn't played a game either. I think they got it right as far as the starters go. I don't actually take major issue with it. As you said, the guys who are going to just miss out, if you're an Anthony Davis or you're a Paul George, you're still going to be an all-star this year. I don't have any doubt about that. And it's good to see that Beal is actually leading the guards, so he should have a lot better shot at actually getting an all-star nod this year. Nick, I'll go over to you. Do you take issue with the fans, voting for an Andrew Wiggins a lot more, or a Klay Thompson who hasn't played?
I definitely have an issue. And it's no disrespect to Andrew Wiggins because he's actually stepped up in a really good way for Golden State. But do I think it's all-star status? No, I don't. I would not have him as more votes than Christian Wood or Brandon Ingram. And also Alex Caruso. I think everybody just wants to just kind of troll. Same thing with Klay Thompson. I'm not understanding why they have over 200,000 votes, which is kind of mind-blowing to me. I don't know if they're actually expecting Klay to actually return by All-Star game or not, but it's just ridiculous to me. But I think the one surprising one for me on this list is Carmelo at number 10 in the front court, which is actually insane considering his circumstances. Carmelo's really stepped them in a huge way, particularly in their last game, I want to say against Philadelphia. So I'm definitely happy to see him get some all-star votes as well. But I'm happy for first guys like Jeremy Grant, who's finally getting his recognition, especially with the year that he's had in Detroit. Bradley Beal is finally getting in. He should have been in last year when he was averaging 30 a game, but now that he's really elevated his play throughout this year, he's finally getting that recognition. Jaylen Brown as well, Zach Levine, Colin Sexton finally. So yeah, I'm really just more excited for the younger guys who have really showed out and are really getting that respect and being in the All-Star voting, because it's always difficult for some of the younger guys when they're being overshadowed by a LeBron, by Steph Curry, by Giannis, by Kevin Durant. So for these young guys to be able to possibly get in, I think that's just so amazing to me.
Yeah, it's nice to see those guys with their names on that list. I think what blows my mind, as you said, is the sheer numbers that a guy like Klay Thompson gets. 200,000 votes were cast for a guy who hasn't played a game this year. I think that's just it. And I see it all the time on Twitter. You see people who put out check out my all-star votes. And it's just their entire team's starting lineup. And it's okay, well, that guy averages 5 points on your team's starting lineup. So I don't see why you're casting a vote for him. So I get the humor behind it a little bit, but to not have a guy like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander on there, I think that's pretty harsh because he's had a really good year so far in OKC. But that pretty much caps things off as far as the All-Star voting goes, as well as the episode as a whole. So before we sign off here, will you guys take a minute to promote where you're at and where people can find you? Chris, I'll start with you.
Yeah, you can find me on almost every social media platform at Asian Tatum, also on YouTube. Starting to be a little bit more active in there, getting some work on some mixes. But thanks for having me, Kenny. It's always a pleasure talking ball with you. So had a great time.
Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it. Nick, where can the folks find you?
Definitely follow me on Twitter at NickAndreATR, and you can pretty much find my work everywhere from Blue Collar to my own website Above the Rim to Clutch Points to Fansided, pretty much all over the internet. You can find my work everywhere there. And but yeah, I mean, thank you guys so much for having me back on the pod, and hopefully we can get back to doing this another time soon.
Definitely, for sure. And for all of you at home who tuned in tonight on Valentine's Day, I thank you very much. You can follow me on social media at shooters_pod on all social platforms. We drop episodes Monday mornings at 8 a.m. Central Standard Time, so be on the lookout for that tomorrow. Also give my prop bets every Tuesday and Thursday at noon Central Standard Time, so keep an eye out for that. I want to thank you all for coming on the show tonight, and we'll see you guys next week.